Harley-Davidson CV40 carburetors are fully mechanical. There are no electronic feedback controls on these carburetors. Reliability has never been an issue, and there are aftermarket improvements and refinements available from manufacturers like CV Performance. Unlike EFI, the simplicity of this carburetor usually enables roadside or motel parking lot repairs. By comparison, EFI trouble often requires towing the bike to a shop. The CV40 does need periodic maintenance, which includes rebuilding and renewal of any worn parts. That's our project.
We began with a bench strip and inspection, followed by a thorough cleaning in our new ultrasonic cleaning machine. Now clean and thoroughly blown dry.
We'll do a close inspection for wear and identify parts needs. Final assembly steps, including precise float adjustment, will complete the rebuild.
These parts are thoroughly cleaned and the carburetor is ready for restoration. There are a few areas that need close attention. This is the vent from the float bowl into the air cleaner. This vent hole had been tapped in an apparent attempt to plug it. The leaking plug at the vent chamber was removed during disassembly of the carburetor. These two ports feed by way of the chambers where the plugs are to the port at the air cleaner. This is a vapor and pressure vent between the float bowl and the carburetor air cleaner. Here I'm measuring the port for the new plug. We're just under 9 millimeters, which would be the factory plug size. There would be an allowance for an interference fit. Finding this size plug is not easy. I found the plug and am preparing the bore for installation. Fortunately, the plug is thin-walled and will yield. I'm using a thin coating of Permatex High-Tech. All excess coating is removed. Here I improvise an arbor press using a welding clamp. With great care, I'm able to press this plug into the bore. If available, I would have used a 9 millimeter diameter plug. This is how I set up the simulated arbor press using the welding clamp. The vent plugs are parallel. I'm using this square-ended steel fitting to press the plug in further. Here the plug is recessed properly and fits snugly. This is a factory plug, and this is the new plug installed. After cleanup with alcohol, there is no residue either outside or inside the plug. This is well sealed, but will not slough sealant. The aftermarket brass fuel inlet fitting was installed on the wrong angle. I warmed the area around the brass fitting with an electric heat gun, holding the temperature to 140 degrees and avoiding the brass fitting. Pressure was applied until the fitting moved in alignment as shown here. All parts are now clean and set in order for assembly. I use Autosol metal polish to polish the float valve seat and clear away all debris. I turn to CV Performance for a premium rebuild kit. Here, I confirm the jet size to be certain it hasn't been modified. I confirm the pilot jet size as well. Here I confirm the jet sizes. They're both OEM. A 195 for the main jet, a 42 for the pilot. These are OEM sizes and these are Keihin jets. This carburetor is very original for a 2001 XL 1200S Sport. I was fortunate to find a core like this. Distinguishing features of the OEM float bowl are no drain and no overflow tube. The main jet remained in the jet holder during cleaning. I am confirming that the jet is tight in the needle jet holder. This is a needle jet. It was left in place during cleaning. If you do remove it, make certain that the long end is facing up as you can see here. The needle jet holder or emulsion tube drops in here and locks the needle jet in place. The needle jet holder and needle are secured with a 9 millimeter box end wrench. All references suggest tightening this snugly. Keep in mind this is a brass fitting going into aluminum threads. Now we install the pilot jet in the pilot jet bore. As with disassembly, I use this multi-screwdriver tool with a narrow shank. Make certain that the main and pilot jets are snug enough not to loosen or vibrate loose. Once the jets and needle holder are secure, blow these passageways out with compressed air. The float and needle valve are next. The float has been tested for leaks and is ready for installation. The float needle came with the CVP kit. The arrow on the casting shows which way the pin goes out. We install the pin in the opposite direction. One end of the pin is slightly mushroomed. Install the pin from the opposite direction where the shank is a normal diameter. Here, I hold pressure on the shorter arm while tapping gently on the pin. The float pivots freely. Here, I'm aligning the hanger. I use this pick to carefully adjust the float height. Keihin wants us to tilt the carburetor 15 to 20 degrees when adjusting the float. This places the float against the float valve without compressing the spring in the valve. When adjusted properly, the float will be parallel to the face of the carburetor. Here I lift the float up slightly to take pressure off the spring and float valve as I adjust the float position. I've gone too far, and now the float needs to be adjusted the other way. Check again using the 15 to 20 degree tilt method. Here's an alternative method. The spacing here should be 10.5 to 11.5 millimeters. Tilt the carburetor body. To achieve the 15 to 20 degree angle, the measurement should be between the body of the carburetor and the tip of the float. Here's the third method, using a quality straight edge. Again, the carburetor is tilted, and the measurement is to the top of the float. For an emergency roadside repair, simply making the float parallel to the face of the carburetor is sufficient. You can readjust the float accurately once you're safely home. I use a sharp pick to remove the gasket. The float bowl gasket in this case is brittle and should not be reused. Sometimes these gaskets can be reused, certainly in an emergency. Notice that I do not scratch the metal while removing the gasket. 1988 to 1991 CV40 carburetors use two gaskets on the float bowl. There is a round O-ring gasket that circles the nozzle, separate from the gasket that goes all the way around the rim of the float bowl. Always clean away any debris after removing gaskets. CV Performance recommends and sells Super Lube synthetic grease for coating O-rings and rubber gaskets. A thin film is plenty. Use sparingly. An added advantage of using this grease is its adhesive ability. This will hold O-rings and gaskets in place during assembly, which is a major help. Super Lube can also be put on shafts and pivoting joints. The nozzle is pressed into the float bowl body. The position is to aim the nozzle at the needle below the piston slide. This is the fuel bowl feed to the accelerator pump and the accelerator pump nozzle. This design is common to the 1989 to 2003 version of the Keihin CV40. 2004 to 2006 carburetors used check balls on the accelerator pump. I found these stainless steel 440C grade 25 2.5 millimeter check balls at Amazon. Although these balls will fit in the earlier style pump, they do not belong in this design accelerator pump. This 2001 float bowl uses a needle check valve below the nozzle. With a film of Super Lube on the accelerator pump diaphragm, the diaphragm is now installed. Now Super Lube is placed on the O-ring that fits in the fuel passageway. I place the O-ring flat side down in the accelerator pump cover. Make sure the accelerator pump spring is centered in both the cover and at the diaphragm. I'm using isopropyl alcohol to test the accelerator pump performance. This poor and intermittent accelerator pump action is indicative of a defective or worn check valve in the nozzle. The accelerator pump nozzle is pressed into the float bowl. The check valve is below the nozzle. Here, I use a vise with protected jaws, multiple layers of tape to prevent damage to the brass nozzle. The nozzle seat is tapered. The check valve is obviously stuck in the float bowl port. There is considerable scale buildup on the needle tip. This is typically from ethanol, fuel, or any gasoline left in the bowl for long periods of time. This needle could not possibly seat, and fuel would be draining back from the nozzle whenever the accelerator pump rod was released. According to CV Performance, this check valve is not available as a service replacement part. Most replace the entire fuel bowl to get the nozzle and check valve. With scuffing pad and Scotch-Brite, there is minor pitting in the surface that must be removed for the check valve to seat properly. I confirmed the tip condition with a magnifier. Seafoam Deep Creep or WD-40 can act as a lubricant to polish the tip and get rid of the final blemishes. Here I prefer restoring the original CV40 Keihin carburetor. I'll also restore the seat in the float bowl. Note that these are bristled brushes and not files. The seat for the needle must be clean. This is a step bore with the needle seat on the bottom. This float bowl and accelerator pump system, including the nozzle and check valve, should function as new when I'm done. Protect the fuel system, especially with long periods of dormancy, to avoid this issue. Polishing the outside of the nozzle is strictly cosmetic, but helpful. This particular air nozzle is ideal for this kind of work, in this case, reverse blowing the nozzle. The orifice is tiny, yet this works really well. Autosol is a polish, but not too abrasive. Here I polish the nozzle tapered seat as well as the seat for the check valve. I'll run these parts through the ultrasonic cleaning machine again. The unique degassing mode puts the machine on for 10 seconds with a pause of 5 seconds to degas and then another 10 seconds of operation, and the cycle repeats itself. This cleaning cycle has flushed these parts and also left them with a bright, shining surface. The float bowl and passageways are once again blown free of any debris or liquid. To make the final nozzle adjustments, we need to assemble the top end of the carburetor. Here I am confirming that the vacuum port in the piston has not been modified. An 1/8" diameter shank will not fit the hole. This indicates that the piston has not been modified. The stock needle valve is in good condition and I will reuse it. Original equipment needles are available from Harley-Davidson. CV Performance offers aftermarket improved needles. This is a needle holder and also the seat for the spring. Some install the needle after installing the piston slide. Here, I'm very carefully assembling the piston with the needle in place, making sure I do not damage the end and fine point of the needle. Superlube can be used to tack down the diaphragm in its groove and also provide lubricity so when the cover goes on, it doesn't move the diaphragm out of position. The diaphragm must not be pinched and has to stay in its groove in order to make a proper seal. Make certain that the spring is centered on the needle spring seat and also in the center of the cap. Seat the cap squarely and centered. There should be no resistance and look for pinching. Preserving the diaphragm is the main goal here. No pinches, no folds. The diaphragm has to be sealed securely. 3 screws are installed now. The 4th screw is put in place with the cable stop bracket. Make certain the slide and needle move freely. The final adjustment of the nozzle is to get the spray pattern to hit directly on the needle. The spray stream is hitting to the right of the needle. The nozzle is a finger press into the float bowl at this point and can be easily moved. The spray stream is spot on. The nozzle is aimed directly at the needle. The fuel will hit the needle and become more atomized as the fuel disperses. It's a steady stream directly at the center of the needle. You want to hear this subtle rattling. That's the check valve. The check valve should rattle if it's not stuck. The nozzle is pressed in finger tight. It can be further pressed in without rotating now by the use of this socket over the nozzle end. I use a bench vise with tape over the jaws as a press. The accelerator pump cover is safely below the jaw of the vise. This gap will be closed. Apply pressure slowly to avoid damaging or, at worst, breaking the float bowl. A thin coating of superlube might relieve strain here. I did this dry and allowed the parts to adjust to each increment of pressure. The nozzle base is now flush with the float bowl surface. A final check of the spray pattern reveals that the nozzle is pointed directly at the center of the needle. This is the final assembly of the float bowl and carburetor body. Superlube on the link and bellows seal will help. All linkages should move freely. Make certain that cotter pins, washers, E-clips, and bushings are all in place. Make certain that the throttle return spring is in position and hooked properly. The vacuum piston should move freely and the needle should be on center. The throttle stop and cable bracket goes on last. Make certain that the throttle stop screw is aligned with the throttle bracket. I adjusted this position on the bench. This is a final check of cotter pins and loose ends. The last step is the idle mixture screw installation. This is the original idle mixture screw with the full packing, the spring, the bushing washer, and the O-ring in place. This can be installed assembled as shown, or the individual pieces, as I'm showing here. The O-ring is already installed and seated. Here I am installing the washer, which serves as a bushing, to protect the O-ring from the spring. Install the spring and make sure all parts are in alignment. I purchased the CV Performance Easy Just idle mixture screw. The Sportster will be ridden at a variety of altitudes, and easy adjustment of the idle mixture screw will be helpful. Make certain the needle point is on center. Do not damage the fine point. Always seat the needle gently. Do not tighten it beyond that point. Be certain that the spring, washer, and O-ring are in alignment. Keep parts centered and do not force the screw into those parts. Note the number of threads showing when the needle is seated. Here, I back the needle off 2.5 turns for a preliminary setting when I start the engine. This carburetor has never been on this engine. If you were reinstalling the original idle mixture screw on your engine and carburetor, you could reset to the original adjustment point. At my 4,200 feet elevation, I expect this to be slightly rich. I will fine-tune the idle mixture. The enricher valve, often described as a choke, unlike a choke that cuts down on the airflow with a butterfly valve, the enricher valve actually feeds more gasoline into the engine during this cold phase. The enricher valve gets polished with autosol. Attaching the choke cable is the last step. This is the assembly that will attach to the choke cable and thread into the carburetor. The carburetor is now ready for installation on the engine.